first tried to figure out how to make one person happy, and then they try to make two people happy. And I think when they got to a few dozen, they started to say, hey, what's the 20% that gets 80% of the results?
You found your way to the Winning Tactics podcast with host Adam Sinkus. Adam discusses winning tactics with small business owners and entrepreneurs, uncovering processes and introducing the tools and solutions for enhancing the bottom line. Thanks again for finding your way to the Winning Tactics podcast. And now your host, Adam Sinkus.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. It is Winning Tactics Podcast Day. Exciting show today. We're talking about how to launch products in your business. This is something every small business owner definitely needs to be thinking about as they expand in their services and products that they offer in their business to gain more revenue. So before we jump into the show, don't forget to hop on over to YouTube or your favorite podcast network, put a favorite on there, leave us a review, and find us at thewinningtactics.com. Let us know by subscribing to our email newsletter so you don't miss the up-to-date information about what's going on and what episodes are coming up. So excited to jump in with my guest today, entrepreneur, author, podcaster, and co-founder and CEO of Castagra Products, roof coating manufacturer. They do awesome stuff in the green space, green eco-friendly roofing. Tats, welcome to the show. Excited for you to bring your knowledge of over 20 years of launching products and inventing different things and being a part of that process. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Thank you, Adam, for inviting me on your show. And to clarify, I'm not the inventor of these things, but I definitely have spent a lot of time on the commercialization and also looking at the viability of products. And I definitely had the opportunity early on to be involved in a lot of them, which means being involved in a lot of things that didn't work, because that's how you learn in some of these areas. And happy to pass on whatever I learned. I guess the current venture you mentioned, Castagra, is a manufacturing business that makes roof coatings, which doesn't come obvious to people how we ended up there. We can talk a little bit more about that, but it's a little bit of my background.
Absolutely. Appreciate that. Excited to dive into this, right? Because small businesses, one of the key ways to increase revenues is to diversify your products and service offerings, right? But as you pointed out, you can make a lot of mistakes in this space before you get one right. So tell us a little bit about how you start to walk down that path when that new idea or that new product comes in front of you. How do you start to understand, is this something that's worthwhile to start chasing?
Absolutely. I think, there's, certain businesses that are more commodity-based businesses that, you can approach operationally and turn successful. But obviously, if you're in a situation that you can devise something that is unique to you, then that will give you a competitive advantage. Now, obviously, there's, some hurdles to do with that. And a lot of that comes down to, do you have something viable? And, when you're in the world of coming up with ideas or aggregating ideas and evaluating them, one of the things that you learned is, when you first start out to do something, there's a lot of people that, tell you great things about your ideas. And then you invest money and you bring it to market, and you quickly realize that, just because someone says it's a good idea doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to buy it. So, in order to really get good at this, you need to figure out, how do I take my network, my abilities, and streamline them so I can find out what the clients are truly looking for, and how to test this cost effectively. Because even the best companies in the world are not batting 100. So how do I do this so that I can find things out inexpensively? How do I channel a bunch of different ideas through the process? And when is it the right time to pursue it further and to or just sort of write it off and say, hey, look, there's another idea coming down the road. And it took a lot of trial and error, but we can talk about some of the insights I've gotten through the years.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point, something that I've thought of, because I'm always like looking for that next edge, right? How can I leverage the next thing? And just because somebody says that it's a good idea doesn't mean it's a viable product or a viable service to offer. And so, how do you go about researching viability? So, what are some of the
Absolutely.
strategies you use?
Absolutely. The first thing you have to figure out is that, is there a really cheap way you can figure this out? And I've heard of all the things with online products. It's very easy, right? Some people pre-sell the product or do fundraisers for the product. That's a wonderful way. Service innovation is very, very easy. Like if you design a service, you go out there and you try it. If it fails, well, you have no inventory. So that's easy. I always encourage people, if you have ideas like that, then just keep rolling those out, because errors in those areas, do not amount to much. And it really comes down to keeping to innovate, because the barriers of entry are very low. Now, if you have a physical product, you have to figure out, how can you kind of prototype maybe in low volume, or how do you partner with people, or how do you sort of create a segment that you could maybe potentially get the money up front to offset the risk. So for instance, Tesla was big in sort of the basic cars these days, but it started on the high end. And one of the things that benefits about starting on the high end, or let's say on a B2B level, is that the customer needs and stuff like that are easier to get. There's fewer customers. People are willing to get early adopters and stuff like that. So if there is a market segment that can give you that feedback, cutting up the market into a sub segment. I think it was Jeffrey Moore, they call it the bowling pin strategy, where you divide up the market into different pins and you have to figure out what the lead pin is. And then once you knock over the lead pin, you can go into other markets using that initial success. So, any strategy where you can sort of, break up the market into segments. So each segment isn't massive, but if you can use that as a reference point to get to the next market, that's great. Sometimes people go very, very broad and they try to tackle the entire market, and a very, very narrow subsection, even if it's not enough to be long-term viable in terms of growth, is a great way to try to get adoption early.
Yeah, you said a couple of things that were really interesting to me. The first is, that prototyping process, right? And I think it's interesting because, like, my son just picked up a 3D printer, and like from a manufacturing perspective, like the ability to have a 3D printer for a couple $100, like, totally changes the game in that prototyping space. Is that something you're going to go to market with? Probably not, but you can at least design it, test it, and see if it physically is going to work in that space, which I think changes the game a little bit from what it's been even a few years ago.
Absolutely. I think just getting to a sellable product as soon as possible. Maybe, if you geek out and you just make it perfect and stuff like that, technically, that's great. But, when you spent so much money and maybe you've over engineered it, like how do you get to a point where it's just good enough to serve a value prop that, just gets over the edge and you can start selling some units, can really get to a point where you can take some of the risk out of it. It's like, hey, if I create this thing with a little bit better material, then I could charge a little bit more with it. But if any way that you can do to inch up on it, that's great. Now there's certain sectors where you just can't do that. I think some parts in health tech or biotech are like this, and you see the way that the money is raised and the projects are done are through like institutions and with the intellectual property spun out. And that's for a reason, because it's such a huge risk up front to do that if you don't have the network or the distribution infrastructure or stuff regulatory heavy. You need those first parts of that to be done by someone else that has the capabilities to do that. So those are some things to consider.
Yeah, I love that. The other thing that you said that was interesting to me, and you just reiterated it, is getting to market as fast as absolutely possible. So it's, to me, like speed, and especially with the way innovation is going and the way technology is going now, is so critical in business. How do you pause and be cautious but quick, right? Because I think you always need to have a little bit of caution in your strategy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people sort of overestimate how quickly someone's going to jump on something and when you launch it. Because ultimately, what you may have the greatest idea in the world, but what happens when you go out there? No one cares, or a few people care if you're onto something. And then you get those few people caring, and it gradually expands. And then you have this massive hurdle of getting to the mainstream and changing people. In the beginning, the competitors ignore the threat, and then as you're trying to gain market share, they start bad mouthing you, or they poke holes in you, and then they start copying. So during that time where they start possibly bad mouthing you or whatever, you've made quite a bit of money at that point. So I think people think that if I tell anyone, then they're going to steal it, run with it. But the execution part, there's a lot to that. So don't get too hung up on it. A technology advantage is never a permanent advantage as well. This is the one thing: technology gets obsolete. So it's a company's mission to take any innovation advantage, whether it's service related or product related, and convert it into a brand advantage. So converting that to brand equity. And I think that's the piece that people forget, is that ultimately it has to keep reinforcing the brand. So you take the money you made for the innovation, you strengthen your brand, which is your customer service, your infrastructure, you bring on better people. And then the next idea finances the strengthening of the brand further, right? Which increases your margins and all those wonderful things. So, the technology piece is like the kickstart, but then you have to capitalize on it going forward.
I love that. And you teased into kind of the next part of our conversation, right? So we've talked a little bit about so far that launch of the product. Like, how do we get from idea to concept to like really starting to like test and tease the market? But at a certain point, you have to like go all in and just be like, all right, here's our new product, right? And so what are some strategies that you use to make sure your launches go effectively?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you have to look at how innovative is your product, right? So you have to decide what the focus of it is. If your product is relatable, it's like an incremental improvement, then obviously you don't have to do as much explaining in your marketing. So, possibly a hard launch, I call it a hard launch, which is like, something exciting coming. Here's the, press releases and stuff like that is possible. But if you're in an area where you're still trying to figure out, things and you're fine tuning it, you have to approach it as a soft launch, I think, because you can learn a lot by doing that. And then what happens is when you do a soft launch, there's usually a few different paths to do it. But I think ultimately it comes down to who are your early supporters, right? And how do you enable them to get you to the next level, right? Because ultimately what your early adopters need is they need the advantage that you get, and they also need the ability to spread the word for you. So really focusing in on them and highlighting the projects, making sure that they're extremely successful is one of the key things. And if there's any way you can take what you're doing and make it, I hate using the word viral, but word of mouth friendly, and any way that you can do it, then that's what you want to do. For our company, when we launched our coding company, we went in a national competition hosted by Dragon's Den. And, that's a reality game show across Canada, and the Shark Tank hosts were part of it as judges. And we won a national competition that, that got us in front of 12 million eyeballs for free. And they also gave us $100,000. So there are these competitions out there that are looking for innovative things. So using these sort of competitions or platforms to amplify your message is key. New is interesting. So, these media channels that have websites and stuff like that, they're always looking for the new thing. And if your thing meets that test, people are excited about it, then, you should be able to capitalize on that early buzz and get a lot of people talking about it.
One of the things you said is find a few people that love your product. I like, one of my favorite strategies is, from a marketing perspective, is I'd rather have 10 raving fans than 1,000 followers, right? Because those 10 raving fans are going to do so much more for my brand in the long term than 1,000 followers that are just kind of like, oh, it's there. And so, I think that's a really important distinction to make, is that, we have to be really engaged in who we get in that early market sample.
Yeah, Adam, you said something really cool there that reminded me. Airbnb started off like this as well. Is that they went and slept on their clients' couches, right? And to get that hands-on, and they first tried to figure out how to make one person happy, and then they try to make two people happy. And I think when they got to a few dozen, they started to say, hey, what's the 20% that gets 80% of the results? And they started to systemize it. So you're absolutely right. Start with making one person happy, 10, then 100, and then take the 20% that gives the most value and scale that. So that's a great process.
So really quick, just thanking our partners, our sponsors over at Ventive. Small business owners, you can't afford to have gaps between marketing, sales, service, and operations. Our partners over there at Ventive have reimagined the CRM so you can have a seamless customer life cycle and transform how you work. They've figured out the formula so your teams can all work together efficiently and effectively. Simplify your customer life cycle and integrate Ventive into your business systems today. There'll be a link in the comments and the show notes for a free 14-day trial, zero risk, no credit card. Absolutely awesome software. So definitely check them out. We've been talking a little bit about the research process. We opened up with that. How do we formulate these new awesome ideas and really, do that risk assessment and that upfront? Is this even viable? We talked a little bit about launch strategies, but it doesn't end there, right? After you launch a product, like, you got to keep this thing going. Otherwise your competition's going to come like stomp all over you with their new shiny thing. And next thing you know, you got a warehouse full of this stuff. So how do you approach your post-launch, that continued strategy to keep the product in front of your customers?
Wow. I mean, that's definitely a point that, I learned the hard way, because, when I had the agency, I was involved in so many different launches. And at the end there, I was like, hey, I'm starting to really get this, right? And starting to feel good about myself. And when we launched our coding company, we got all this media coverage, thousands of emails coming out, that feeling really great. And you're absolutely right. when you go out there, you steal a couple of big clients from some very big companies. You better watch out, because once they see your playbook, you better understand how to defend a market. And what I learned about that is the importance of understanding the operational side and the finance side. I mean, we're talking a lot of the front end to get the product going, the skill sets that are marketing and sales. But it's really pays to understand how the operations side and the finance side comes in on servicing customers, keeping them happy, not just a little bit happy, just absolutely loyal and happy. There's a difference between repeat customers and loyal customers. Repeat customers may be coming to you because you're cheaper, maybe coming to you because you're closer to them, but loyal customers are the ones that are coming to you because you are you, and they truly won't switch for a price concession or a trip to Ireland and stuff like that. And you really have to understand sort of what you need to do to keep customers. And how we could have used the phrase is that we borrowed it from Airbnb, is 11-star client service, is we want wow. Just like I'm satisfied does not keep a loyal customer. Like, how do you do a wow and do it in a way that is profitable to the company? And sometimes it's just simple as being nice. Sometimes it's being fast with the information, but you really need to understand that with your business and be consistent. You don't need to be 11-star every single time. You just have to be better than your competition every single touch point. And you have to be extremely paranoid that you maintain that standard. And when you're a small company, that could mean that you need to focus down geographically or industry to be able to maintain that standard. So be it. You're going to be much further ahead than if you're spread out over 3 or 4 different opportunities or segments and lose it all. So I think that's the part that you really need to understand. If you do not understand the ops side or the financial, get on it, understand it, and it will help that second act, which is important, the consolidation phase, which is the branding and keeping people happy side, a lot. So,
yeah, people forget about how important the customer experience is even in physical products, right? Even when you're not maybe necessarily the one that's responsible for that total customer life cycle, right? I think of like in retail, think of like Samsung and Apple phones, right? Their primary sales channels are wireless carriers and Best Buy, right? So they have to rely on those individual retailers to create that customer life cycle for them, and they provide lots of training to those organizations to maintain that. But it's something that I think, a lot of people overlook. I know I have in the past with different products and different things that we've launched. And I go, oh, well, we kind of fell flat there after we got this initial excitement out. We got a few projects done with it. We got this done with it. And then we just kind of fell flat because we just kind of like went back to business as usual instead of, how can we upscale this and upscale our experience to continue this leverage that we just created.
Yeah, wonderful. I ran across this story, and it was told by an executive of Nordstrom's, and he said that there was a person that came into one of his stores and returned something, and the lady calmly reached into the till and gave the customer his money back. And I was like, "What's so special about the store?" He goes, "Well, it was a tire. It returned. Nordstrom's doesn't sell tires." And the reason he tells this story is that sometimes it doesn't need to be logical. If you can do something that's going to help the customer out within reason, that you go above and beyond. And one of the things we learned, we used to do with shipping, right? Shipping, we help customers with shipping. and we deal with these shipping companies. That has nothing to do with us, right? And we used to say when there's issues, hey, it's them, it's not us. But I think, now when there's an issue and we had a request to say, hey, we want a refund, we're like, hey, here you go. And because the thing is, they don't care if it's us or the shipping company. The customer has the problem, and we need to solve it. And if we start passing the buck and doing that, it just adds to someone's headache. It's just easier to say, hey, what can I do within reason to help your day go better, is the sentiment that we want to pass on. And I think that story that I ran across, sort of demonstrates that sentiment.
Yeah, it is interesting, right? There's a lot of stores that actually now have started to adopt that kind of philosophy to it. Kohl's pairing up with Amazon to do Amazon returns. Like, that's such a small thing, but like now it drives like a whole different strategy for shopping at Kohl's, right? Because if I have an Amazon return now, it's much easier for me to go to Kohl's and deal with it than it is to try and deal with it through Amazon and ship it and all that stuff. And so now I've created a whole nother experience in the Kohl's store. So
yeah. And also innovation, I just want to clarify that innovation and creativity are not necessarily linked. You just talked about people partnering, or for me, ideas that are present in a different industry that you can bring in to your industry. So you didn't think it up. It just happens to be in a different industry. Hey, looks like it might work. Let's bring it into this industry and test it out cost effectively and see if it works. I mean, there's a wealth of things that people do, and because a lot of these industries are siloed out from each other, then you just take these ideas and then just start implementing them. So I mean, it's a gold mine if you think of it that way.
Yeah, no, 100% absolute gold mine there. There's so many strategies that are cross compatible that if you just stop and go, how can I apply this to what I'm doing? It becomes at face value, it becomes a very innovative idea because nobody else is doing it in your industry. You're just sitting there going, yeah, I saw Kohl's and Amazon do this exact same thing. It was a great idea, and so I'm just going to use it, but you get to play the hero in that moment, right? You get to play the innovator and the exciter, being exciting in the marketplace. So I think it's a really, really cool, partnerships oftentimes, in my opinion, are so overlooked when it comes to product launches and product ideas that, I think it's a cool avenue for people to take when they're thinking about how they diversify.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess the key is, and people say this a lot, but when it actually comes down to it, it's hard to do, is that you have to be willing to make mistakes. You have to be able to forgive mistakes and almost celebrate the right type of mistakes in order for innovation to happen. And as long as, and I hear this that one idea does not risk the entire company or tank the company, and it's recoverable in some ways, then encouraging ideas to go and try is not a bad thing. And but I'll tell you, a lot of people say it, but it's harder to do in practice. So, but with practice, it does get better. And the companies that are able to do that and can laugh about their things that don't work out in a fun way, and then learn from it and make the adjustment, are the ones that are way far ahead.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I always like to wrap up the show. We are getting towards the end of our time. I like to wrap up the show with a final thought, something that our audience can take away and apply to their business tomorrow. So I leave the floor to you for your final thoughts.
Sure, absolutely. I think competitive advantage is what we're all looking for in a business. And competitive advantage is, how can you take, who you are, who your organization is, and double or triple down on. There's no company in the world that is exactly like you. So although you can take ideas from other companies, figure out what you are and what you do great as a company. And if you can package that up in a value proposition for your clients, then it's going to be next to impossible to copy. So find some way to triple down on being you, and you'll see great success.
That is absolutely phenomenal advice. I love it. You got a lot of stuff going on like I do. So you got your Tats Talks, which is your podcast, right? And a LinkedIn Live series. So tell us a little bit about those and then where people can find you.
Sure, absolutely. The podcast is a wonderful learning tool. It's a great way to talk to world-class thinkers, conversations that wouldn't have had otherwise. Being a little bit earlier on the podcast space within our industry, the live stream like you do is ability to connect more deeply within the industry that we operate, and also give back and feature the people that are doing good. So that's just our way of giving back in a small way. So it's great. I think, taking these conversations that we would have just had anyways, and then sharing it with other people is a wonderful sort of 2-in-1 or 3-in-1, depending on how you look at it. And you get that because you're doing as well. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. And where else can people find you?
Sure. On LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter, Instagram as well. You can just Google me, Tatsuya Nakagawa or Tats Nakagawa, and you can access it. And, love to connect with people that are like-minded or open-minded as well. So yeah, feel free to look me up.
I really appreciate your time today. And as always, I appreciate everybody that jumped on the live stream and listened along with us today. You can catch the replays always on YouTube and all the major podcast networks. Again, don't forget to hop over there and subscribe to the show so you don't miss a beat. And hop onto our website, thewinningtactics.com, and you can subscribe to our newsletter there, catch up on the latest and greatest and all of what's going on. We just went through a homepage redesign, so make sure you go check that out. We appreciate your time, and we appreciate everybody hopping on. Have a wonderful rest of your week.
Well, that wraps up yet another episode of the Winning Tactics Podcast. You can find Adam on both the LinkedIn and Facebook platforms. And to support the show and ensure the success of the podcast, would you kindly consider visiting Patreon.com/Adam Sinkus? We greatly appreciate it. And until next time, from the Winning Tactics Podcast, remember, culture is how your team behaves when no one is looking. Take good care, and thanks for listening.